And please stay here as we welcome the next session.
Today and this weekend, there is another important venue. It's in Japan. It's the IMF fall session for those CEOs, ministers, and central bank governors who could not make it today to Deauville. In that context, the World Bank issued a statement of concern, saying that they were very concerned about growth. Not saying that they were thinking of a slow growth, but saying that talking about recession and even talking about economic and social collapse. I'm happier to be here. I think the mood is much happier here, and there's much more upbeat. Good morning. I'm Jean-Christophe Mizola. I'm a director at McKinsey and general manager for France, and it is my pleasure this morning to introduce and moderate a panel on growth strategies in a slow growth environment, in a slow growth world. Let me start by reminding us of a few facts. This is at least what you would expect from a consultant. Major forces are shaping the global economy. That was true 2 years ago, and it is still true. 50% of the world growth in the next 10 years will be outside of OECD countries, more specifically in 440 cities outside of the OECD countries. Non-OECD is going to account for more than 60% of the world's GDP in less than 20 years. By the way, this is exactly where the world was before the year 1800. In the next 20 years, 1.3 million people will migrate to cities every week. Megacities, that is cities of more than 10 million inhabitants, megacities, the number of these megacities will double by 2025, all of this happening in the emerging countries. A city like Shanghai will be bigger than a country like Mexico. There will be 1 billion new consumers, people who with income above $5,000 per year. That is more than the double of what the world population of these consumers are today. All this happening again in emerging markets. Let's move now to another area, the internet. The internet, Facebook, if Facebook would be a country, it would be the third largest country in the world. We're talking about 35 billion objects that today are interconnected and connected to the web. The internet, directly or indirectly, contributed to something like 21% of growth, of GDP growth in the last years. Since 1990, world GDP has grown by about 5% per year. Trade flow has grown by a little bit more than 7% per year. Capital flows have grown by more than 10% per year. And information flows have grown by more than 50% per growth. If we surveyed CEOs, as we do, McKinsey does this regularly, 60% of them, of the largest companies, believe that in the next 10 years, their business model will dramatically evolve and change. If we look back 65% of those large companies that have grown by more than 8% per year had actually business model changes. A few views about this world we live in, a few views about growth. So what to make all of this? What about growth strategies? To talk about this, it is my pleasure to have 4 leaders of global companies coming from diverse industries who have accepted to share their views and their experience on the subject. So let me introduce Anne Whitaker, Bruno Bensasson, Carlo da Soro Biondo, and Denis Terrien, if you don't mind coming. Thank you. Seat. So Anne, you have a background in chemistry and business. You have been working in sales and marketing for more than 20 years, 22 years more precisely. You have also worked on HR and talent management. You developed centers of excellence for leadership. Today you're the president of Sanofi North America Pharma. You worked over these years at GSK, sales and marketing and HR. And I was told that you were, and this is very, very difficult for me to understand, I don't have a medical background, VP and business head of cardiovascular, metabolic, and urology unit. That sounds very impressive.
At GSK. So.
At GSK, that sounds very impressive, actually. Carlo Biondo is president of Google operations for South Europe, Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. You travel from South Africa to Dubai, Paris, and Moscow. You started as a consultant. That's good hope for me. And you led KPMG Consulting in France. Then you moved to Unisys, yes, working in hardware and software. In 2004, you became the SVP of strategy of AOL, then the CEO of AOL France. You sold it, became president of AOL Europe. Then you joined Lagardère Active as CEO for the international business. That was 2007, 2008. 40 countries you had to oversee. At that time, you went for an LBO, and you told yourself, no more big companies. Let's go with smaller things. And in 2009, you joined Google. And when I asked Carlo, you know, what's the logic there? You told me, well, Google is not actually a big company. It's not even a company. It is a movement. So this sounds very promising. Bruno, you have a background as a scientist and an engineer. You started here in Normandy, actually, in charge of nuclear safety. So I hope we're in good hands, okay? Then you became the chief of staff of the head of the French agency in charge of nuclear safety, 2002. Then advisor to the French Minister of Industry in charge of nuclear energy and environment, an interesting combination. In 2006, you became advisor to the French president in charge of industry, environment, and transportation. And you joined GDF Suez in 2008 in charge of economic studies. And right now, you are the chief strategy officer of GDF Suez. Denis Terrien. Denis is the CEO of Free SI. I was told not to mention Trois Suisses International anymore. It's Free SI, which is the 3rd e-commerce group in France and the 10th in Europe. Half e-commerce, half services. You will explain all this to us. You started at McKinsey in the 90s. Then you launched Amazon in France. spent half of your life in the US and in the UK, and you have an experience by being both an entrepreneur, creating businesses like Amazon, for instance, or developing new businesses. We'll talk about this, but also as a manager of large groups, FreeSI currently, but also you have been managing companies like Parker, Waterman, or Reynolds. Thank you to all of us for joining me. Let me start with one question, actually, before. Is this? Oh, sorry. In backstage, they told me you're the first man we put this on, and you have a different morphology than women. I don't know about heads, but anyway. So let me start with one first question. Before we dive into the various businesses and so on, we have been talking about growth. Is the world growing? Is the world not growing? Is this an opportunity? Is it a challenge? What does this inspire you when you hear to such a statement? Carlo?
Well, I think that growth is a consequence of change. So we should talk about change somehow. First of all, I think the sentence is a very Occidental way to look at the world. If you look at the world from the South, from Asia, there is growth. If you look at certain industries, there is a lot of growth. To me, the problem is that resistance to change means refusing growth. And because in the Occidental world, our lifestyle is better than everywhere else in the world, we have a tendency to resist to change more, hence we have less growth. Actually, when we're at the Women's Forum, so if I look at my wife and think at her, I would say women have a much better ability to embrace and push for change. So there is hope.
That's good. I like that statement. Guido, and you?
I would say we are not so much in a world of slow growth, but of two-speed growth. To add two figures to what you've said before, the growth that is expected for this year, the global growth of 3.3%, is quite higher, in fact, than the 2.5% that European countries, OECD, enjoyed since, let's say, 1820, the beginning of capitalism. That was 2.5%, not to speak about the 0.6 that Europe could know in the centuries before. And another figure, so to illustrate the two-speed growth, is that before 2035, 90% of the energy demand growth will take place in non-OECD countries. So that's the two figures that I want to give first to relativize the situation of view on growth. So what do we do in such a context? First, and especially in mature countries, we focus not so much on growth, but more on profitability, not so much on the size of the revenues, but more on the results. The second thing we do is to find new balances in our countries mix, new balances in our energy mix, and new balances in our activity mix. I could come back to that later. And the third thing we are looking really much for is flexibility. Flexibility in order to be able to adapt to shocks, and in our energy and environment sector, there are some important shocks. And flexibility also to be able to seize the opportunities, and there are a lot of opportunities, especially in emerging countries, that we can take advantage of.
Thank you. And when we talked before this session, you make an intriguing comment about history, and you actually say that these are precisely at those times that the world is growing the most. Can you?
So I think, first of all, as a public company, I think it's critical that we find a way to grow. So I think you can go back and look at history and study the business cycles, that all of us who went to business school know that there are 20 business cycles that last 20 or 25 years. But if you go all the way back to perhaps the worst time that we had was in the Great Depression in the 1930s, and you really evaluate companies that sustained through that and were able to drive growth, I think they did a couple of things. Number one, they innovated. So they didn't hunker down and try to save their way through it. They didn't try to necessarily just leverage pricing or those sorts of things, but they really innovated. So I'll give you an example. I mean, there were some great products, brands, business models that were established back in the 1930s. One that we use every day. So if you take DuPont, a company that's been around for a long time. Neoprene, so synthetic rubber, was invented in the 1930s in the Great Depression. Nylon, which is in everything, I have on, I think these stockings are nylon. I'm not sure, some form, but some great products that were innovated during that time. But what you also saw those companies do that I think we have to take as a lesson, I'm taking as a lesson, is that you have to make choices. So in order to innovate, you can't just pile that on to your employees today who are overworked because you probably have had to manage costs. You have to stop doing some things that are not providing the return. And that's sometimes very hard for people to do, for companies to do. So you have to make the room for the innovation and just, I think, with all the doom and gloom, I'm not Pollyannish or I am an optimist, but I believe that inevitably we will come out of this big business cycle, and I think those companies that innovate will be sustainable. And for those companies that don't innovate, this might be their last recession because they might not be around for the next business cycle, and that's my view on it.
Thank you, Anne. Denis, and you're an optimist or a pessimist?
Depends how you view the world and the courage you take to change. We are in the business of retailing, and fortunately or unfortunately, we are in very slow growth economies, France, Belgium, and Spain. And when we look at growth, we look at it either by consolidation. You could acquire your competitor, but in some markets we have 30, 40, 50% market share, so it's difficult. Another one would be to look at serious innovation, like Carlo could do in Google and what have you. But if ever you think of retailing, it's been one of the oldest business trade in the world, and there are very, very few serious innovation. You can have tweaks, interesting tweaks left, right, and center, but in terms of innovation, it's very difficult. The third way to look at a group is to decide to change your business model. And it's a little bit like what Nokia did. Nokia was in the timber business, and they decided to go in the electronics and the cell phone business. And this is what we've decided to do. The group that I run it's a family-owned company. It's been on for 80 years, and I'm only the 5th CEO in that history. It's interesting to see that each time there was a change in CEO, there was a major disruption in the market. We started by manufacturing yarn. And that was, in the north of France, that was a great trade. And after, it was in competition with a lot of other yarn coming from the UK and other countries. Therefore, they decided to go in retailing and open over 2,000 shops. They even closed the manufacturing. Another CEO came and they say, if ever we go in retailing in 2,000 shops in France, we can't touch all the customers. And so they decided to go in mail order. And they were one of the first in mail order. And they decided to close every single shop they had and invented themselves in mail order. And now after, they were challenged in mail order, so they developed finance. And we became one of the leading financier in terms of consumer credit in France. Very profitable business. And with what happened in 2008, we sold partly that business. 2009, the company, when I arrived, the company was in serious challenge. We were 20%, our sales were going down by 20%, and we were unprofitable. And therefore, we decided that we will also make another change, another fundamental change from mail order to e-commerce and from B2C to B2B. And what we have to understand is, in order to do those changes, innovation, as Schumpeter says, is also a destruction. Therefore, where is it that you built, and how is it that as a CEO of a group, you help those people that you know the jobs are going to change?
And you said that you have to innovate, and these times provide opportunities actually to move forward, otherwise you die. Can you shed a little bit some lights about what are your strategies typically? What are the strategies that Sanofi deploys in order not to die and to be one of these innovators?
Well, as a healthcare company, which we traditionally were a pharmaceutical company, and we're changing our business model to become more of a diversified healthcare company, but focus on patients and consumers. Innovation is absolutely critical to our existence. I mean, from a product standpoint, with medicines, I mean, we have to be innovating in the labs, or we will not have products to bring to bear. But what Sanofi has done is we've gone a step further now to really innovate around our business model. So becoming more diversified, looking at how we can leverage our capabilities as an organization. So for example, we've been traditionally in the pharmaceutical business. We now recognize prevention is absolutely key. We have a vaccines business. We also recognize, rare diseases are really important, and biologics within those. And then a couple of areas, too, that consumer healthcare is absolutely critical. When you surround a patient, they don't just think about a medicine. They think about, how can I prevent that medicine? How can I prevent that disease? How can I care for myself? And then lastly, just around that diversification, we've looked at our capability and our strength of understanding science and disease and how to develop molecules, chemical assets and biologics, and we've entered into animal health so that we can take the assets that we have that are helping humans today and see how they can apply in animals. So really evolving that business model through diversification, but even within those perhaps diversified units, we're going forward with more of a evolution of our business model. So for example, in pharmaceuticals that I lead, we in the past have just traditionally sold medicines. Well, we're shifting now to bring what we would term integrated solutions. So we're not just interested in addressing the need of a diabetes patient to reduce their blood glucose, but we're interested in helping them care for themselves as a diabetic. So we're bringing monitoring systems to the market. We have the first blood glucose management system that hooks to the iPhone, and services and that. So we're interested in moving from sort of the clinical results to the patient outcomes. So I think that shift, that innovation in your product offerings as well as your business model is absolutely critical to really survive for the future.
So does this mean that in the future you will not be selling only products, but actually the whole solution? Like, would you go, for instance, into actually patient care or things like that?
It is something that we're considering, and I'll just give you an example of how we're testing that in markets where it is possible today. So in Brazil, for diabetic patients, we recognize that there are a number of comorbidities that diabetic patients have: heart disease, lipid problems, and so we're offering them not only our insulin that we make, and we make a long-acting and a rapid-acting insulin, but we're also putting in sort of a box for them their cardiovascular medicines, other medicines that are those comorbidities. We're putting in the testing strips. We're putting in a monitor so a patient can have that. We're providing a coaching solution for the patient, all as a total Sanofi package, and pricing it based on the income of the individuals. So we've said in Brazil, in parts of this region of Brazil, it will cost no more than 20% of your income, basically, to take care of all your comorbidities. So that's one example of really innovating and moving beyond product by product, but trying to bring a total solution to bear.
Thank you. Carlo, I was going to ask you, as I was remembering the importance of the internet for growth. At the same time, there's a question that came, which is
corporate citizenship. Yeah,
almost. Are Google and Amazon's growth often at the expense of the rest of the world?
Okay. First of all, I think there are two things which matter. First one, none of us has a right to a certain level of wealth forever. We need to deserve what we have by providing value to the user. So the focus at Google is very simple. We are maniacs. We are, if you want, completely focused on the user. And when we focus on the user, you may change the position of other companies. But we think that corporate citizenship requires to be focused on the user, focused on the consumer. This is the first point. Second point, an organizational rule. At Google, you have maximum 50% of overhead like me talking with the environment. The other 50% are engineers focusing on the product, so focusing on the users and developing product that the end users will love. And I think this organizational principle creates the balance between short-term and medium-long term that guarantees growth. The third element, and I think is extremely important, is that really we must accept that change is constant. So, as I said before, we don't deserve to survive if we don't provide value. And this value means that you must be ready to cannibalize yourself if you feel this is needed. We entered into mobility 4 or 5 years ago very fast because we saw that there is a change there. So, and to finish, in terms of value, I would say e-commerce creates jobs all around the world and allows small companies to compete with big ones.
Can you give facts, proof about that?
Imagine today that you sell, I have a friend selling bathtubs in the north of France, in Alsace, and because the Germans came in with less expensive apparels, he couldn't sell them anymore in Europe. He decided to open websites in China, in US, and he could sell his niche all over the world. So what I believe is that the internet has been a big element of democratization, allowing small companies to fight with the big ones. It also improved the efficiency and life cycle of creation of products very much. At third, it allowed to create new services and is also a new media. So when you talk about corporate citizenship, I think you need to consider lots of things. You need to consider how many jobs are created by something, what is done to be part of the environment in culture, and we developed a cultural institute to do that, and what value we provide to users long term. To me, the metric of not annoying the established big companies is not a metric. We don't care. We are focused on the user, not on the established powers.
And do you work actually with other companies to help them grow by being a solution provider, or?
We are a consulting company.
Okay.
Nobody is perfect, as you were saying before.
So you stayed in consulting.
Yes, I am a consultant. Google is a consulting company and serves customers 3 ways. The first way is we have a list of big companies and we work them to make sure that the web provides them value. And it can help them to sell, it can help them to defend their brand, it can help them to conquer a new market, it can help them to define the right approaches to develop their services and products. And we've got teams that work with those companies, sometimes even full-time, to help them do that. For example, airline companies, low-cost airline companies, and now the big ones tell us, what price should I make to the ticket? Set 10 days or 15 days before people come. Please fill up my plane. And I receive phone calls sometimes say, you filled up that plane and the cost has been much higher. What do we do? This is only an example. So we are a consulting company trying to make sure that the web provides values to corporations and SMBs.
Okay, thank you. Renaud, what about your company?
Our company, our strategy is threefold. The first orientation is to accelerate our position in emerging countries. At the moment, 30% of our assets are outside Europe, and our goal is to have 50% of our development expenditures in emerging countries. In South America, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, the last entrance being Mongolia. So to provide these countries with the necessary energy and water they need for growth. The second orientation is to reinforce these activities that are quite resilient to market troubles in mature countries, like transport infrastructures, like environment services, water and waste services, and to capitalize on these activities. Last but not least, for these activities that are in the mature markets and that are very exposed to the situation of the economy, we want to optimize them, to integrate them, and to develop new business model, to answer one of the questions about sustainable development, new sustainable business model, more focused on value than on volume. So especially in the field of renewable energies, in the field of energy efficiency, like smart grids, new activity that is connecting the energy sector and the IT sector. That's the three orientations of our strategy in this given two growth world.
Sometimes people say that energy is a constraint to growth. Would you agree with the statement, or?
I think that on one side, energy is absolutely a very important fuel for growth, and we see it strongly in emerging countries that have some tremendous energy needs. And we see it also, I should say, in the oil price, because even if we are in a situation that some people consider as catastrophic, the oil price has never been so high, because there is a very strong need for energy and especially oil. On the other hand, I definitely think that we have to reinvent some new growth mode if we want to keep on growing while these fossil fuels, especially oil and coal, have a certain scarcity. And on top of that, because we have to tackle strongly climate change, and for these two reasons, we have not only to provide our customers with energy, but with energy solutions that fits their need, and in the same time protect the environment and deliver an energy that will be also necessary for the future or young generations.
Okay. Denis, you told us you are the fifth CEO of an ancient old group, so I guess you have 20 years ahead of you now. What is your strategy for the next 20 years?
So when we looked at the market and the environment, we say e-commerce is a gold rush. And Carlo is right. There's a lot of things that you can do when there's a new gold rush, like 100 years ago what happened in the US. But in that gold rush, the first one are able to take the best spots. This is Google, this is Amazon, this is new concepts like vente privée or eBay. But when you're a second comer, a third comer, it's a little bit more difficult. And in that gold rush, when you're not the first comer, very few people find the gold. However, all the people that provide the tools are always ready to make a living. And if ever you provide the tools for all the people that go and look at the gold, then you're sure to make a living, and you're sure that your business is going to last. So this is the way we embarked. We say on the one hand, we're going to try to look for gold, and we're going to move our mail order companies onto e-commerce. And that was a lot of internal training, a lot of changes in behavior, a lot of changing in processes. And in the scope of 3 years, we became the third largest e-commerce group in France, with operations in B2C, where we sell clothes, home furniture, and what have you, and in B2B, where we sell office furniture. However, that, as a gold rush, we say we may hit the goal, we may not hit the goal. Let's also develop the other side. And the other side was all the service to all the other e-commerce that would come in the market. And here we looked at all the skills we had in our company. We were an old company, but old companies have also a lot of very, very strong skills. For example, whenever you're in mail order, you get catalogs. Therefore, we looked at our photo studio. We realized that we had amazing skills. We took the people out of the photo studio from the company, created an independent company, opened that independent company to the outside world and competitors. Now we have the largest photo studio in France. And we work not only for our group companies, for outside companies. We look at another skill. When you are in mail order, you're pretty good at answering calls. So what we took all the people from the call centers in each of the companies, put them in one single independent company, opened that company to all our competitors, and now that call centers is servicing a lot of our competitors. And we went like that skill by skill within the company. We took another one, for example, everything that had to do with logistics or delivery points. In the delivery points, we took all the delivery points, created an independent company, and now that delivery point have not only 5 customers that are our group customers, but 2,500 competitors are using our delivery points. So that was a major change in the business model. And so at the end of the year, over 50% of the employees will be part of the service companies. And last year, we reached a point where more than 50% of the revenues of the service companies were done with outside customers. And here what you have to think is, when you're in group company, how can you help the service companies, or are you still free to use those companies? And here we use a very basic rule. We say each of the commerce company can challenge each of the service company with any competitors they have outside the group. Therefore, it forced the service companies within the group to be as competitive as people outside the group. And not only this, but commerce companies had the right to choose outside the group. We had, for example, a commercial company that was pretty good at insurance, and they went to see our call center and say, could you provide us calls in order to answer or deliver some selling, on internet and by phone some insurance. And our internal call company could not provide a good service at a great cost. Therefore, they chose outside the company, outside the group. However, what I asked each time this is done is that I have a memo to explain me why they chose outside the group, so that we can help the group company improve. So today, that transition is still in the making. We do, with the service companies that are 50% of their headcount, over 50% of the turnover outside the companies, and those are delivering fine. They're growing with the e-commerce, and they are profitable. And for all the commercial companies, we have some joys and we have some pains sometimes.
As we were listening to these various strategies, there is a question that, there are a couple of questions that come here, and there's behind this a question that I read, which is, are we talking about winning at the expense of others? Is this a zero-sum game? Or do you have the feeling that through your strategies you are, let me say, growing the pie, growing the market? Any reaction?
Yeah. In terms of commerce, we are winning compared to the others. Whenever you sell clothes, if ever we sell a green T-shirt, then somebody else's green T-shirt that's not going to be sold, because there's X amount of green T-shirts that are sold each year in France. However, if ever you have a fundamental belief that e-commerce is growing, and our belief is that you will not develop e-commerce without great innovative service, then those services are incremental jobs, incremental skills that we add to the pie, and here we don't take share from the competitors.
Carlo? I would say 2 things. First one, our growth at Google is a small fraction of the value we bring to our customers. If our customers don't grow, we don't grow. And what has made the company what it is the exact confluence of interest between what we do and what our customers do, because of the auction system and because of the fact we sell under a performance method. Number 2, I would say we distribute about 25% of our turnover. I don't know what it is this year, because We don't know yet, but if I go back to last year, it was about 7 or 8 billion, which were distributed to content partners, people that put content on the web, like media and other people, and we share money with them. So I think the model has to be, you are in B2B, providing value around. If you don't distribute your turnover and you don't provide value around, you die. However, I think this is an important element. Once again, I'm surprised by part of the question, and I want to provoke the audience here. Some of the questions look like, because I am dressed like this, I've got the right to be dressed like this for all my life. Because I eat meat today, I have the right to eat meat tomorrow. Because I'm big, I'm important, so you need to respect me forever. That mentality is what is killing Occident. We are incredibly arrogant, because we believe that because of our past, we have a right to the future. If in the Occidental countries, and Europe in particular, we believe that, we deserve to die. Because this is an egoistic way of looking at things. You know, Winston Churchill used to say something that I really like, which is, you live your life with what you obtain, but you create your life with what you give.
Anne, you.
Well, it's hard to follow that. So if I understood the question, are we making the economy better? Are we creating jobs?
Or is it a zero-sum game? Yeah.
Right. So I believe that with our strategy at Sanofi, with trying to diversify, bring more of a total solution, we absolutely are addressing growth for not only our company but for others, because we're addressing more of the ecosystem. So, for example, we recognize we can't do everything at Sanofi ourselves. So we need data partners. We need companies that will integrate the data to help us develop insight to act upon, to bring those solutions to market for patients or for consumers or for animals. We need companies and government to do basic research. So, for example, in the U.S., we need the National Institute of Health to do basic research that when we can do development on. So by continuing to focus on innovation, but not only at a product level, also looking at device and diagnostic, we're helping continue that growth in the government. And we're looking for new ways to partner as well. I'll just offer an example. You haven't seen in the past a big pharma company that would partner with a venture capital fund to actually create a new company. And we did that as Sanofi. We created a new biotech company by partnering with Third Rock, a venture capital fund. So we're trying to look for ways to create new companies, to expand our partners' business, to address the whole ecosystem. One, because we know we can't do it all ourselves, and we're part of this bigger system that we need to address as an outcome more patient outcomes versus just a clinical outcome with the product. And the last thing I would say, it's important for us to look at the total system and how we're impacting it, because we know that healthcare is a major part, a major cost for all states, all countries, and it's a major burden. And as we have aging populations, it's going to eat up more of the GDP as we go forward. So we have to work together to take out the waste in the system and to bring more of total solutions. And so I think we're concerned about that equally as we're concerned about our own growth.
Okay. And what are typically the challenges that you face in your organization in implementing the strategy?
And so, I mean, there are a couple of things. I think sometimes we get in our own way, right? So we have our processes that we've followed to made us successful so far. And so, to Carlos' point, sometimes you have to forget the past and, go forward. So trying to simplify and get all the parties involved, our regulatory people, our attorneys aligned with the shift in the business model. We do face challenges with regulation. We're a heavily regulated industry and pharmaceuticals and healthcare. And so it's usually the companies like Sanofi that are pushing up against those regulations, trying to get them to policymakers to shift. So that's one of the biggest challenges, I would say, is getting, moving the guardrails for our business and looking for new ways potentially to set up business differently.
Bruno, I believe you had a reaction to the previous question?
To the previous question, yes, I think in the energy and environment sector, we are definitely fueling growth. It's not a zero-sum game. We are creating value, like 30 billion euro per year, and that's why we exist and why we think we will be able to survive. Shared value for our clients first, for our employees, for our shareholders too. And just to bring our customers the energy and environment solutions that they need. And if I can answer to one of the other questions that was addressed to men, so anyone but Anne, I think that part of our vision toward the future and new generations, this focus on new generation, I have the temptation to think that, of course, men can have it, but I have the feeling that women could have it even more, and that's all the better for companies such as ours. To go to your second question about challenges, I would say that first, money is not so much a challenge. We've got the liquidity. There is plenty of liquidity in the world, perhaps even too much. So the question is not about money. The question is more about first having a stable regulatory regime framework in mature countries or in emerging countries to make the investor confident enough to invest. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is having in our companies the innovation skills to enter new countries as far as Mongolia, at least from a European point of view, and to invent new business models more sustainable in mature markets. And the last challenge is really to have these human skills, diverse human resources, to be able to understand the diversity of the emerging countries on one side, and to be able, on the other side, to tackle, quite courageously, it needs courage, to tackle the challenge of mature markets. That's our main challenge today.
Thank you. I think I'm being reminded that we are reaching the end of our session here. Maybe we pick a few of the last questions before we conclude. I guess the point about Google Chrome is not a question. It says, how Google Chrome is just excellent. I don't think this is a question.
Thank you very much.
But let me move then to another question which I found interesting. Somebody is asking actually how we think about profit and growth as two different things and how to reconcile them. Does this inspire anybody on the panel? Carlo, and then Bruno.
When you start thinking to your salary, you start losing. As a company, when you start focusing on profit, you start losing. I believe profit is a consequence of a job well done, to a certain extent. So the way I think we have to look at this is that being focused on the user once again and trying to say, I make sure I provide value is important. Let me give you an example. We are very present in Africa. I've got about, in my region, a little bit less than 10% of the employees are in Africa. We make no revenue there, but we believe that the growth of Africa and what will happen is important for the future. It's a bet on the future. So keep the ability to bet on the future. And the last one is the probably most important lesson in life that I got is that very often the crazy people are the ones who are right. You need to accept to go against your paradigms and try to look at things from different perspectives. And then you'll create economy. And the last thing is profit creating jobs. No, it's growth that creates jobs. And if you look at the amount of jobs that, for example, the internet creates in Africa, is probably the best enabler to create growth because it allows the small people, the small companies to grow.
Bruno?
I think we shouldn't oppose growth and profit. When you look at growth, it's at the benefit of diverse stakeholders, first the customers, I agree with Carlo, also the employees that I find here a way to develop their competencies, and last the shareholders, the investors, and profit is only one part of value creation, perhaps not the most important part, but one part beside the others. And second thing, I would say that, of course, the economy that we are talking about this morning is only a tool. I think it can be a useful tool, but once you have tackled other topics that are much more important, like peace and family and so on. So it's just a tool, and we don't have to expect too much of this tool. However, I think that, and here there was a question about alternative economy. I would say that companies such as ours that can be seen quite traditional, in the same way, in the same time, are developing new business model. For example, for the bottom of the pyramid, we have an initiative called Rassembleur d'énergie, Gathering Energies, dedicating to develop some new business model with social entrepreneurs in order to provide energy access to all. And I think that in this situation, there is no need to oppose profit and growth. The solutions will be found if people mobilize themselves to invent them, and in the same time, they will benefit to the final customers, to the entrepreneur, the social entrepreneur, and the big corporate as ours.
Okay. Before maybe a last word, I take from these very rich discussions four themes that I found kind of interesting. There's the first theme that I heard, which is, let's not look at the mean, and let's look at the granularity of growth. I think this is a very interesting message for also those IMF people meeting today in Japan. The second theme that I heard was innovation. I think that was loud and clear from everybody here, which leads me to the third one. I hear many examples of changes in business models and not being afraid of changes in the business model. There's a fourth theme that I heard, which is connections between partners, including outside of our own company or our own industries. So that is what I captured and understood from this discussion. If you had yourself to conclude with one word this whole discussion, what would that be?
On my side, I would just recall that at the moment, the demand for oil, for coal, for water is not growing too slowly, but too quickly. And what we have to invent, and that's what we are committed to, is to invent some solutions that reconcile the need for growth, for prosperity, and at the same time, protection of the environment and supplying also the resources that the future generation will need.
Anne or Denis?
Okay. There was a question over there. You men, do you include women in developing vision? I think that the vision without including diversity will fail. In order to develop a vision, you have to understand where you are today, and as 52% of the population is women, there's we have no choice. Men, chauvinistic men, right? And after the vision is also to see where you want to go, and therefore it has to be done. Companies that do not do it will fail. Our company suffered. One of the reasons was that although 70% of our customers were female, 5% of our managers were female. In the course of 2 years, today over 50% of the business unit managers are female, especially for the largest one. And this has been a very, very active program to try to bring closer our customers with the people that make decisions for them. So this is something I just wanted to tackle here. In order to change, I think it has to be, do we have the courage to change? I think some countries and some people have it. Other countries have not shown the courage to change, and it's the same with the companies. And after, there are two fundamental beliefs that I'd like to carry in order to have a great change. One is the concept of subsidiarity. i.e. go into the closest position to where the decision has to be made to make it, which is a very different way to run a business than historically pyramidal structure. And this is also very, very challenging, but I think the internet and Google is forcing us to go there. And the other is the equity, how to be equitable with all the stakeholders you have, because I believe that there's no economic development without social development, and there's no social development as well without economic development. So once you take those into account, I think we can build a better world.
Anne?
So I'm glad I let others go first because I wasn't sure if you said one word or a few words. So I'll offer a few words as well. I think we cannot forget that most of us who are, whether we're in service industries or we're in technology products that we're developing, we're actually in a knowledge economy. And when you're trying to make change in really a knowledge and economy, you have to change the culture of your organization. So it really starts for me with culture, and by culture I mean it means your leadership has to align around, have a vision or a view, align around that. You have to determine the capabilities that you need. You need to address the processes that were built for the past and now are not working for the future, and you've got to also address your people, their capabilities, but not only their capabilities. Do they believe in the future that you describe? Do they see themselves? Are you helping them see themselves there so that you can win their hearts and minds so that they ultimately will let go of the past, what's made them successful in the past, to sort of face the chaos of innovation? And so I think culture is critically important. And then the last thing that I will say, just in this ties to culture, in order to innovate, any of us who are customer facing or reliant on that interaction, we're reliant on listening to the customer. And we have to have a culture where our people are committed to listening to our customers. Not that we just think we have all the answers and the best technology and the best solution. And so that's a big part of the culture shift that you have to make so that you can bring solutions or services or products or services or solutions that offer great value to the customer. So that's what I would leave you with.
Thank you.
To me, there is one point. When we talk about innovation is not only what you do, it's also how you do it. And we have a tendency to confuse innovation with new products, new stuff. And look at Apple, for example. They are very successful, but what they do is that maybe they make products that have already been existing for long, but they make them better to use. So this is the first point. Innovation is also how you do things. The second point is we are going to a world where instead of having, in the past, you had one country dominating the world. If you go back to 200 years ago, France sometime, for a short time, then UK, then the US. And now we are into a multicentric world. And I think we all have a duty, which is to try to understand what we do well and then do it. So if you look at France, Italy, Middle East got it very well. Russia and Africa, there are certain areas in which each of those different parts have got a competitive advantage. Let's accept that, focus on that competitive advantage, and become the global center for that competitive advantage. I call that multicentric globalization. I think it's an important concept, and if we accept that, we create a world where we all can contribute well.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice break.